when that's happened. So maybe we need to have some more often. I'm going to be the moderator today for this. My name is Carlyle Currier. Most everybody here knows me. I'm currently president of the Colorado Farm Bureau. I've been involved in CALBA since the beginning. Started out when we organized it 15 years ago, or 16, 17 years ago now. And I was vice president for a number of years. And that old cliche about being a heartbeat for the president was more real than ever. We had such a great president, Charlie Bartlett. Unfortunately, lost him to a heart attack. Welcome everyone for being here today. We're going to talk about an issue today that's very important to agriculture. We all know that we need more storage. We've been talking about that for years. Building storage is really hard to do because it's high cost of engineering, not mention just the cost of construction. And so we feel it's very what we can is that we can build more storage. I know in my area, we don't have enough water late in the year, even on a normal year, for all the economic needs, simply because there isn't enough local storage to meet that need. We have all kinds of water in the spring and snow melting, but by the end of August, if we don't have it in storage, it's gone. So it's a hugely important thing. Our snowpack in the mountains improved a lot in the last 48 hours. I'm on the north slope of the Grand Mesa. Snow increased 4 inches in the last 48 hours. So we're really pleased about that. We needed it. We're actually above normal on Grand Mesa right now for snowpack. So that's been a long time since we've seen it above normal snowpack. But I want to go ahead and ask the members of the panel this morning to introduce themselves, and we'll start here with Joe.
Good morning. Morning. Need to turn it on. Good morning. There we go. Everybody wait. Good morning. My name is Joe Frank. I am the general manager of the Lower South Platte Water Conservancy District. We're supposed to give a little bit of just give a little background. Okay. I started this in December of 2003, so 18 years ago. We've been working on a lot of ways to solve water shortages in our district. It's pretty clear since I've been on the board that the two main issues in our district are existing water shortages, primarily in the irrigated agriculture arena, and then the threat of the buy and dry, not just in our area, but in the entire South Platte Basin. As we see a growing population, we see multiple municipalities and others purchasing ground with the intent of drying it up. So we've been working on ways to maybe solve both of those issues for quite some time. We're getting to a partnership that we've been working on with Parker here, Parker Water and Sanitation. So we can go into more detail there, but that's just a little bit of my background.
All right. Good morning. My name is Ron Red. I'm the threat that he just mentioned. I'm the district manager for Parker Water. I've actually been there for 9 years. I took over for Frank Yeager. Some of you may know him before that. And prior to that, I was in Castle Rocks. I've been in Colorado 21 years now. I'm from Montana, and I say that because my next statement usually gets me kicked out. I got lost in Los Angeles for about 14 years, working for the water district down there. And of course, one of our goals is to supply water to our community and get off our non-renewable groundwater and get this sustainable water. So that's been our focus, and look forward to talking about storage.
Good morning. My name is Amy Moyer. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships with the Colorado River District. I am a pretty new face to the Colorado River District, started there in March of 2021. And at the River We represent 15 counties on the Colorado's western slope. And one of my primary responsibilities at the River District is to run our community funding partnership, which came about this year after the passage of ballot question 7A in November of 2020. So the River District has $4.2 million annually to dedicate to water projects across our district. And over this year, we've made several awards related to storage, whether that's looking at rehabilitating storage or looking at supporting some in-system smaller storage to make our deliveries more efficient, or even looking at how we can assist in early stages of permitting and design and engineering. So I think we'll be able to talk about some of those examples during the panel today.
My name is Lorenz. I'm from Colorado Springs Utilities, or I work for Colorado Springs Utilities. I'm actually from ranch up by Beulah, Colorado. Sunny, as always. Yeah, so thankful for the snow here. Projects, my primary focus is our Arkansas Basin Water Sharing Program, which, like you mentioned, we're here really trying to figure out a way to get the water that a growing city of Colorado Springs needs without permanent dry up of agriculture. I think the state as a whole has an appreciation just of the importance of all the uses of water that we have, whether it be recreation, municipal use, industrial use, and farming. And the days of kind of one side pitted against each other, we don't want to go back to that again. And as we go into drought times, that's sometimes what could happen. So instead, what we seek to do is to partnership, figure out ways that the city can get water when it needs it, but in a way that not only maintains, but actually, in some cases, enhance agriculture in the lower Arkansas Valley. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. So my other projects are water storage, primarily focused in the lower Arkansas Valley. We do a little bit up on Fountain Creek. I think the money issue for water storage is, storage is probably, if you come to these enough, if you go to water conferences enough, it is the #1 topic that will always be on the agenda. And that's probably been that way for 10 years now. But how we do storage, how we pay for it, how we figure out ways that it's in a location that works for folks, those are the tough things to talk about. And so I think this panel today is going to give you some real on the ground examples that you might look at in your own situations, ways to get more storage in the state.
Well, thank you. Why don't you go ahead and start answering this question? We'll come down the line of what specific projects you're working on, and whether you need to be able to work with agriculture. We hear a lot about that today, that municipalities and agriculture need to work together. Why is that important? How do we go about doing that? And we'll talk a little about some of the specific projects you're working on, and we'll down the line have each talk about that.
Okay, thanks. I don't know if we're going to have, I'm looking up here because we may have a slide showing some of these locations, but over the last 10 years, we've in several instances had partnership with agriculture on water storage projects. And typically, the way these take shape is as we talk to ag entities, umbrella entities, whether it be well augmentation groups, ditch companies, they have similar needs to what we have. They always talk about more stable supply. Wherever you're at in the state, we're a boomer bust state. You will have the wettest year followed by the driest year. You never have an average year, right? And so whether you're a farmer or a municipality, you're wanting to use storage as a way to level out that supply so you can get through those dry times with the wet times. The first one we're going to look at is that picture, yeah, right there. So Lower Arkansas Water Management Association is a well augmentation group located in Moyer, Colorado. Our largest water sharing program to date was with them. So it's a program where they acquired water for their augmentation plan. We get the water 5 out of 10 years. They get the water 5 out of 10 years. We pay the full cost of the water. That's just the difference in value when a municipality needs water. But one thing that Lawman asked for in the deal, they said, we really need additional water storage. And so what they were able to do, this is a gravel pit located 1 mile east of the town of Lamar, 1,500 acre feet, plus or minus a little bit, completely owned by Lawman. We paid for 500 acre feet of that storage for them. And what they do here is, in wet years, at least in the Arkansas Basin, there's always excess water to be released from the city of Pueblo to Colorado Springs. What they'll do is lease that water, they'll fill up this water storage, and then when they get to a dry year, they're able to pump it back out to the Arkansas River and allow their members to keep pumping. That's the inlet. Water comes into it from the Lamar Canal. So the Lamar Canal, most of their shares are used for well augmentation. And I know you guys on the South Platte have been doing gravel pit storage a good bit of time. We just hadn't been doing it in the Arkansas Basin. And so this is one of the first new projects that would use gravel pit storage. We've since had another well augmentation group called AGRA. It's focused more in the Lahana area. I think they've acquired 2 or 3 existing gravel pits and are now storing water in there. So this is the first, I guess, kind of idea I'll toss out there to folks is we tend to think, we have in the past thought of storage as really big projects. It's the Pueblo Reservoir, John Martin Reservoir, some on-stream dam, and maybe those will happen in the future. I'm a little bit suspect that you'll ever get one of those permitted again. And so what we really need to think about is alternatives to that maybe aren't as large in size, but can be done in a way that has a couple of partners going into it, meets a very specific need. And you know, something that actually can be operated. One of my favorite parts of work partners is they're practical about stuff. You guys know how to solve problems. In fact, you get frustrated sometimes at how slow everybody else is at solving problems. You guys see something and you say, okay, let's fix it. And so this is one of those things. That's Don Higbee, by the way. He'll be mortified that he's part of my presentation. He's the general manager of Lower Arkansas Water Management Association. But partnering with you guys tends to get projects done faster, and that's good for the city because if we do stuff that tends to take way too long. So the next one, if you can pull up the map, maybe one of the early ones. So there's a couple of other storage vessels we could talk about. One is, and this has been a reservoir that was built over 100 years ago. It's called Adobe Reservoir, just to be confusing. It's also called Blue Lake at times. And I think it has one other name that every once in a while. They just throw in the mess with you so that you have no idea what they're talking about. The Fort Lyon Canal Company is the owner of Adobe Reservoir. So several years ago, and this will sound like a familiar theme to a lot of you that have reservoirs on your system, but Division of Water Resources put their dam under restriction. Said they had to do quite a bit of work on the dam to get those restrictions lifted. So what Fort Lyon did, as they went, they got CWCD grants to be able to do that work on their dam. They went ahead and retrofitted the dam so that it could be raised at some point. So they met all the requirements of the state, but they built it in a way that they could expand the reservoir by up to 20,000 acre feet. And then what was really awesome, they just went throughout the Arkansas Basin and said, hey, we've got a chance to do additional storage here, who's interested? And the well augmentation group said they were interested in Colorado Springs, said we were interested as part of our water sharing program and partnering there. So we've spent the last 3 years now being 50-50 partners in the studies necessary to expand Adobe Reservoir. If it's expanded, we're looking for 5,000 acre feet of storage. The canal company is looking for additional 6,000 acre feet of storage. And then they're just still openly looking for partners that could come in. On a scale of permitting difficulty, something out on the eastern plains, an existing reservoir, maybe a 2 on the scale of permitting. If we wanted to build a similar size reservoir up in the mountains, it'd be like probably $1 million of trying to permit something. It may take 20 to 30 to 100 years to get permitted. So that's one of the benefits we see of municipality partnering with agriculture. And then, so I don't take up the full 75 minutes. The last one we have is Meredith Reservoir and Lake Henry, which are part of the Colorado Canal system. You guys don't know, Colorado Springs, City of Aurora, Pueblo Water, starting back in the 70s, purchased the majority of that company. That was the old way of doing business. That was just straight up purchase and dry. But there remains a very committed contingent of continuing farmers under that company. 10% of the shares are still in agriculture. A lot of you probably know Matt Heinrich. He's one of the continuing farmers there. And so what happens with Lake Meredith is it ends up getting used, not just get extra use by those 10% of Colorado Canal shareholders, but it's actually allowed to be used by a whole bunch of districts that participate in the winter water storage program. And so they can store their water in there, no cost to store. And then we typically see, like, if you get late in the summer and there's a lot of transit loss running water down the winter, then you see ditches further downstream saying, hey, we'd like to get some water out of Lake Meredith because they could save 10, sometimes 15% transit loss that they might have. So I guess I would start out, those are probably the 3 examples that come top of mind to me. It really is just I'll just stress to folks, if you're in the ag community, reach out to your local municipalities. You might be surprised that they actually aren't all bad guys, and some of them actually do need help.
Thanks, Scott. I think I'll start talking about a partnership on Elkhead Reservoir we actually don't have on the map, but I thought it would be a great tee-up, and that's on me, Greg, but I'm pivoting a little bit because I do want to mention Elkhead Reservoir that we hadn't put on the map ahead of time, but it's a good example of partners coming together and a good example of existing multi-purpose storage, where we're seeing the benefits and the foresight of having a very strategic storage opportunity that's providing releases that are supporting our farmers and ranchers, our municipalities, and also providing water for very critical environmental stretches that support our endangered fish. And so the River District, through our community funding partnership, did provide this year $50,000 to postpone the Upper River, and additionally worked with the state to contract additional water out of Elkhead to provide late season irrigation water for some of our farmers and ranchers. So it's a good example of how we're seeing the benefits of storage, especially in the Yampa, and using it for multi-purpose objectives that support municipalities, our farmers and ranchers, and again, some critical stretches that support endangered fish populations. But then I will turn to 2 projects on the map, and I think I'll start with Fish Creek Reservoir number 2 in the Gunnison Basin. This is a project that the River District provided about $150,000 to lift a storage restriction. So this is looking at how do we rehabilitate existing storage that needs dam repairs to allow it to remove the dam safety restrictions. And so Fish Creek number 2 will provide late season irrigation water. I think obviously it's pretty empty here because it's under storage restriction. It's under construction now. We'll provide late season irrigation water, but we'll also is working with Trout Unlimited to look at how irrigation releases can be timed to support in-stream flow objectives. So again, good opportunities for win-wins, good opportunities for multiple partners. And then we'll turn to Kendall Reservoir, which is on the Grand Mesa. This was the River District provided $35,000 again for the rehabilitation of Kendall Dam that was at risk of a storage restriction. We'll provide late season irrigation water to the Plateau Creek Basin. Partners include us, the River District, the dam owners, and also the U.S. Forest Service. They also have funding for the recreational benefits of that reservoir. But again, looking at rehabilitating storage is something that's top of our mind, and seeing where are there some low-hanging fruit to provide some strategic storage, and getting to the point that Scott mentioned of looking at even small-scale storage. Every drop counts. There are often strategic locations where we may be able to rehabilitate the outlet works or the dam to allow for that important late season irrigation water. But I'll try to be quick here so I can give Joe and a little bit of time.
All right. Again, Ron Red. The project that we're working on is we title it the Platte Valley Water Partnership, and really what it is a way to develop junior and free river water on the lower South Platte to be able to benefit both our districts, so the municipality and the farmers and ranchers out there. I think as this evolved, one of the things that came out of it as we were talking, actually probably better stated as we were listening to each other, is we're developing a project that we hope becomes a model for how the municipalities and farmers can work together and benefit one another. And so it's been a fun process. I was telling someone earlier, it just makes for a better life when you're working together. Partnerships reduce costs, of course, and you get the political buy-in a little better, but just being able to solve problems together, I don't know, I think one of our goals is to just impact people for good. And I think this project goes there. So I'll just keep it at that high level, and I'll turn it over to Joe.
Great. All right, well, perfect. So Ron mentioned the Platte Valley Partnership that we just formed, but we've been working on for years. And so I'll give a little bit of background here. In 2014, a group of us actually formed what was called the Northeast Colorado Water Cooperative, and that had been working on for several years. Jim Yon was a part of forming that group. And it was really looking at how agriculture primarily could work together, or people in the lower South Platte could work together on infrastructure and sharing times with excess, that some people had excess water and others had shortages, and we're trying to figure out ways to work together. Parker became a non-voting member. You had to be to be a voting member. You had to be your principal office had to be in our district, right in the Lower River. But Parker, in the early 2000s, Parker Water had come down and actually purchased some ground in the Iliff area in our district. And that was actually purchased to help them build Ruder-Hess Reservoir as a mitigation to the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program, the endangered species in central Nebraska. Then there's been a program that was signed in place, and Parker didn't really need that for the mitigation. There's other mitigation that took place. So they have this ground. They've been an active player in the Lower River, became a member of the co-op, and we've been talking with Parker ever since about ways to work together. And like Ron said, really listen to each other and kind of understood each other's needs. And when we formed the co-op, we quickly found out that there's really two main things that we needed in agriculture in the Lower River. One was infrastructure and ways of making more efficient use of the water that's down there. And the other one was partnerships, because we've vastly realized we're not going to be able to afford this and do this on our own. And so I think it was a perfect timing of getting together and brainstorming, how we could work together there. So on a specific project, Parker has a timeline that they need water by, and they came to us and said, we're ready to move forward. And in actually our district, on kind of behalf of the co-op, and not just the but other water users within our district said, hey, yeah, we'd like to be a partner in moving forward on this specific project. Jim was involved as the manager of the North He's also managing North Sterling Irrigation District, but also the Pruitt Reservoir. So we really came together with these ideas and started putting the pieces together. Maybe you can, yeah, so one of the things I guess we should really focus on, and I commend Parker for agreeing to this, is that any infrastructure that we put in will not be permanent by and dry. So that was one of our concerns as we build this infrastructure. It's shared infrastructure. It's going to have water that's moving back up to the Front Range. To us, that we don't build this pipeline could then, have by and dry that we do it. So in our agreements, we have no by and dry, and we have the actual types of water that can be put into it. So, back to that listening part, they listened to us and were agreeable to that term. But I can't how much we appreciate that in the Lower River, because that's been a huge concern of ours. Maybe you could, well, these are just some points. So Parker, yeah, let's move to the actual project itself. So we did file a new water right. Surprising that there's, for a lot of you to actually know that there are some times that we do have some available water in the South Platte. I mean, we are a very water short system, a lot of demands, but we do, there's not terminal storage like there are on a lot of other basins. And so there are times that we have this excess water that we can capture. And as further down in the river, there are some times of availability. So we studied, we've looked at water availability, we've looked at point flow analysis and really understand the data, the hydrology, to figure out that how much water you could yield from a new water right. So we filed for a junior water right. One is a small reservoir, I call it small, 600 acre feet near Iliff. That would capture junior water right. One is an existing reservoir, so we would utilize the existing infrastructure of the Pruitt Reservoir and their diversion, and we would actually trade them water because they have their irrigation district spreads quite a ways and it goes down Iliff area, and they have efficiency and they lose a lot of water on their delivery down to their Iliff irrigation district. And so we would do this trade and trade them junior water in the years that we could capture this water and put that water in Pruitt, and then they would now have Pruitt water sitting in Iliff, and that water that we traded would then be available for us to use, us in Parker. We could either take it directly back up, and you see the pipeline, the Conception pipeline going back up to the River Hess Reservoir, which is Parker's main source of water there. And along that pipeline, on our upper end of our district, we would be able to take delivery to several of our constituents. We could put it into direct irrigation. We can put it into recharge facilities used as augmentation for wells, which creates more, small habitat areas. So there's a whole benefit to the environmental recreation community. And then in addition, we can pipe that water from Pruitt to a new reservoir, a large reservoir north of Akron called the Fremont Butte Reservoir, which can hold up to 72,000 acre feet. So it is a large project, especially in phase 2, when you get into the full build out of the project, and then that can be put back into the pipeline, moved back up to the Front Range. To River Hess, and once again, that water could also be delivered. The pipe would be expanded, enlarged as it goes through our district, so that additional water could be delivered to agriculture communities. We could also deliver water back through the Pruitt and to constituents in more of the middle part of our district in the Sterling area, and then we will have most likely some additional storage in the Iliff Reservoir that we can release to our constituents downstream. So, we are looking at this as a supplemental supply that can be used to shore up some of the shortages in the agriculture community within our district. And that we have about 400,000 acres, and about half of that is irrigated. And so we're hoping that this isn't going to be a main supply for people, but it will be a supply that can help shore up those shortages.
Thank you for telling us about these different projects that are going on. It's really great to know there are things happening. We hear a lot of talk about what should be happening, but to actually see work being done on the ground and actual projects moving forward is I think really great. We've been pushing things like this for 15 years and still waiting to see anything happen there, and don't know whether that's going to happen or not. So the one that can tell you that, but I hope you're right. We heard a lot of talk about cooperation and mutual benefits between agriculture and municipalities. Are there other interests that need to be brought into that package as well, moving forward with building storage projects? Is it just municipal that needs to be involved, or do we need to get other partners involved?
I guess I can start. Pass the microphone back. I think early on, it does take a smaller group to start with, and I don't mean it, to exclude people. It's just that it is, our project especially is pretty complicated in bringing together all the pieces. We've had multiple meetings with the land users or landowners and the water users down in our area, and to see what they need, what their requirements are, what their issues are. And so I think early on, the dialogue that we've had has been good. But we've also been part of a larger group. It's called the South Platte Regional Opportunities Water Group. SPROG, a lot of people have heard about that. And that really was a kind of a large regional look at how can we solve issues in our basin when it comes to this growing population. There's existing needs out there, not just in the agriculture community, but the environmental rec community and others. How can we, kind of look at this in a large regional level? SPROG did come up with some really good guiding principles that we've actually taken forward and used in our project, and made sure that that's all incorporated within our project moving forward. It is harder once you start to cast the net wider, but as we start to now, I think, move forward, we're talking about third parties coming in. We're talking about how can we work with others out there, including the environmental community, and how can we make this a win-win-win project. So I think there's a lot of things that we're working on every day on improving the project. And so yeah, I think the answer is yes, but I think it all depends on kind of the timing and when you bring different players into. And another piece is definitely the funding. We've been talking about that part and how do you start bringing the funding pieces together on these projects.
It's a great question, and I think from our experiences, you always keep the door open for other stakeholders. And examples that we've seen and are seeing on this project are recreation. You build a 70,000 acre-foot reservoir out in eastern Colorado, people are going to want to fish out there. And so we keep that open. It's a little too early to get too much into details on that. Our job really has been to make sure we're connecting the elected officials and their vision of recreation with the landowners and their vision. They're not really the same, but ultimately they like that recreation out there. But that's an example. One people don't think about it either is, as we bring that water back to Parker, we'll probably have to have some type of treatment facility. We know we will. That could be an RO or some form of treatment. And so there are some cities along the way that would love to have a treatment plant in their boundaries. And we could partner with them to help them in their treating of their water. So those ideas are out there. We haven't explored it too far, but it's an example where you just got to keep your head up to see the opportunities to work with others. Again, it helps reduce costs and it builds community.
Yeah, on partnerships, I think it's an obvious recognition that more partners can bring more financial contributions, but I think it's also valuable to recognize that a wider tent and additional partners can bring more ideas and more creativity. And our panel got the opportunity to get to talk ahead of this, and there's something that, Joe, you said that's really stuck with me that, you as you were working on the Parker and Lower project have said, there's got to be another way, and you kept working at the table. And I think that's a good example of just how more ideas, more creativity, staying at the table can provide a project on the other end. And then the last piece is of partnerships is maybe a more intangible benefit of the momentum and confidence that it can bring to a project. And as the River District is getting our funding program off the ground, we continually to hear the support of having another partner that says, yes, this is a good idea, makes a lot of difference and can bring a lot of confidence and emotional support to keep going for a project. So I think that's an important piece to recognize as well.
I'll agree with everybody, even if they said something different. No, you're right, Amy. The ideas that come from additional people, the potential for more funding. I've looked, no matter what type of project it is, whether it's storage or water sharing, it's like building a house. You got to start with the foundation. The foundation has to be, in this case, if an ag entity has a reservoir, they obviously have to have the first say in what that's going to be used for. And so just simply making that decision that you want to bring other partners in is something. And then what happens is, you kind of have the folks that come and kick the tires and want to look, but everybody wants storage. But when you actually get down to it, how many people is this going to benefit? Who can bring money to the table? Those are the things you start to look at. And so I think you do have a big tent to begin with. As soon as you say, okay, we got to put money in, that tent shrinks considerably. Once you get to that level, though, you guys really get on the ground, start coming up. What is the project we're going to build here? What is the purpose of that project? And you almost end up with a single-minded focus of just, we're going to go and we're going to get this thing done. The only thing I'd add to it, I think somebody else mentioned this earlier, but all you guys that have reservoirs already on your ditch systems, 90% of them have CPW contracts to be able to use the surface area. We've always found Colorado Parks and Wildlife to be a really good partner to have. They tend to come in later in the process after you kind of know what you're going to have, the size of the reservoir, because their needs are very specific. They want to bring their hunters around the reservoir. They want to bring fishermen. Sometimes they want to bring boats, get them out on the reservoir. And so they tend to be one that I always think of, regardless of where you're doing storage, there's somebody that's probably going to have interest in it.
Well, thank you, Scott. You mentioned that the people bringing money to the table and being involved. That seems to be a major issue with most agricultural projects. I know in my area on Grand Mesa, there have been reservoirs that were built by farmers 100 years ago that didn't cost a whole lot. They just went up there with teams of horses and slip scrapers and started moving dirt and did not spend a lot of money on reservoirs. Today, a lot of those reservoirs are face restrictions, not safe by modern standards. They're going to have to be improved, and yet just getting the permits and the engineering to be able to improve those reservoirs are sometimes high 6-figure or even 7-figure numbers before you even move dirt. How do you see the financial aspects of building storage? What do we have to do to be able to have the money available for farmers and ranchers to be able to build the storage they need, whether it's by themselves or in cooperation with other groups? Where's the financing going to come from?
So it's been true in history. Every time there's a crisis, government's answer is always to throw money in it, right? And so we've got a couple of crises going on. What's happening on the Colorado River with the severe we look at it as a 20-year drought, a historic drought going on there, but also the pandemic and the infrastructure bill. And then in Colorado, for some reason, we've got sports betting, and it's just pumping a ton of money to CWCB. There's a lot of opportunity for funding for projects now, probably more than any time. I've been in the water business for 20 years now, and I think there's more avenues to get government funding for projects than there have been. Bringing in partners that want to spend money on a project, that see a benefit to it, that's another good one. You know, maybe that may be the only reason you'd want to bring a city into the project is if they have a need, they're willing to, one, help with the permitting process, which can be cumbersome, but two, bring significant funds to the project. Kind of think that's how you stack those things up again. And, you know, what I'd suggest for the ag folks out there, well, the grant funding process can be quite cumbersome. The federal one, I think it takes like a year to fill out all the forms to get a federal grant. But what you can do, you know, partner with your local conservancy district. They have folks on staff that do that. If you're partnering with the city, they have folks on staff that do that. If it's not something that you necessarily feel like you have the strength to do in-house, bring in a partner that does have that strength to help you with that. And then kind of floodgates just open up and you start seeing funds that you may have never even known were available.
I'll just talk about how the River District is approaching funding and particularly for storage, which is always a big barrier for these projects. But again, with the passage of ballot question 7A, we've opened up a new funding opportunity for the Western Slope, and our intent is to use those dollars as a catalyst and help provide that match to go for larger grant opportunities that might come from the federal side or the new infrastructure bill that we're really focused on. How do we bring as much of those dollars to our district? We're also looking at how do we provide a niche in funding for areas that other funding sources don't cover, like design or helping with permitting or the engineering costs to help make a project shovel ready and more competitive for the larger funding opportunities. But we do try and work with our constituents that funding needs to be considered at every step of the way. You have to look at the funding costs from the beginning, from the design and engineering through construction and then through the O&M phase on the back end to make sure that we don't have these reservoirs then end up back on the storage restriction list. So we're looking at how the River District can play an even more important role across our constituencies in the funding role.
I'm listening to this and I'm learning. I don't know if I have a lot to add. We do try the grants, and when you're in the middle of Douglas County, one of the more affluent counties in the state, you don't get a lot of attention that way. But what we do is we again partnerships help spread the costs. We look at phasing, but one of the benefits we have is growth, and it's a double-edged sword. Growth comes, you got to supply more water, but growth also provides some money to solve the water problem. And I'm not sure a lot of people know, to buy a house in Parker, Colorado, that water and sewer tap is now $42,000 per house, and almost half of that is dealing with long-term water issues and bring that in. So funding is a major issue. A lot of people think we're made up of money, but we have constituents that don't believe that. Especially when their winter bill is $100 minimum. So it's always a big deal. We're looking forward to seeing what comes out of this latest round of funds available from the federal government. But we tend to look at it as we got to figure out how to solve this on our own, and if we can get that, even better.
So everyone mentioned partnerships. I think that's definitely key. Brings in an economy of scale. The more you can bring it in, and do a multi-purpose project and help fund that along the way. I think, you definitely have to have a good project. I mean, you have to have studied it and really, a good project will provide momentum, I think, and people looking at it and backing it and saying, yeah, this is something that's worthwhile. We want to partner in, we want to get behind it and help fund. You mentioned the grant funding. The Conservancy district is helping out. It was funny, we were at our table here at breakfast. We applied for a grant through the Bureau, and just, we have 3 staff, well, now 4 staff. It is cumbersome, and it took us almost 2 years to get under contract. It's a great grant. It's helped us move the co-op forward that I mentioned before. But there is that cumbersome, that hard part of getting these grant monies and using them. I think I'm excited to see some of this funding come forward with the infrastructure bill, but I'm wondering how hard that is going to be to tap into it. It's like Ron said, I think we need to look at how can we fund these, and then are there additional outside funding sources that can help? And I think once again, if you have that good project, that one that everybody can get behind, there's some momentum there. Hopefully we can get some funding there to help out. Real quick.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you, expand on that a little bit. What data do farmers need to bring to the table to get the process of even writing those grants? What do you have to know to begin with? Somebody started from scratch, a small farmer district that wants to apply for a grant to improve a reservoir. Where do they need to start? What figures they need to put together? What data do they need? What questions they need to ask and answer to even start the process?
Yeah, so in the Arkansas basin, actually in every basin, there's something called basin roundtables. CWCB set them up as a way to get more local input on water issues. They tend to be good places to get education and access to grant funds from the state. And what I was going to follow up with from what Ron had said about Parker tends to not be able to access funds. Colorado Springs, same thing. We don't try to access grant funds, so we view that pool as being a little different than what we would need to have our users to fund our stuff. But what both Fort Lyon and the Lower Arkansas Water Management Association project did, they used us as matching funds. So most grants say you have to bring some money to the table. So even if you guys want to do something just on your own without partners, you're going to have to expect you're going to bring some cash to the table to be able to access grant funds. It's a crazy thing, right? You got to have money to get more money. But both Llama and Fort Lyon used us as the matching. So Llama was able to purchase the rest of that debt using CWCB grants and loans. And the part that we purchased for them, that basically leveraged, that was the security on the loan that was able to allow them to do that. Fort Lyon, I think their example may be instructive for other bridge companies. They went to the round table. We have, actually, there's one person, it's Abby Ortega in the Arkansas Basin that's designated to deal with requests on grant funds. And you just go and talk to this person and they will tell you what amount of funds are available. They'll give you the forms that you have to fill out. They'll actually help you go through the process of filling those things out. Those are the types of things I would start with just to get the process going. It may seem scary on the outside, but I think once you get into it, it's a lot of paperwork, but it's nothing that's going to kill you.
And maybe I can turn back to just talking a little bit about the data and where to start. And I think trying to understand a really strong, asking the question of what is the need? Where is the water going? Who is it going to? Having a good understanding of the intent behind the storage and what is that amount that you need will go a long way to bring those partners along, and we'll set up, if there is extensive permitting that would need to happen, a strong foundation for that. And as part of that, really starting to think about your baseline data of whether it's temperature, aquatic surveys, or understanding your hydrograph, all of that groundwork, especially for, definitely if it's a larger scale storage project, will pay off in the long run of starting to talk to partners about how that data collection needs to happen. Are we talking about the same kind of apples to apples comparisons of how we collect data? Because I think as you go through looking at storage projects, you often talk to one permitting entity and they want to see the data this way. And then you talk to the next one and they want to see the data a different way. So trying to line up some of those efficiencies on the front end can make these projects go a little faster and hopefully more streamlined.
Well, I have nothing encouraging to say about grant writing, so I'll just pass it along. I will tell you, we did get a grant, conservation grant. And I have 110 employees and not one of us knows how to write grant applications, so we hired it out. And so the key part is to get someone that's kind of like a grant whisperer. I think we ended up spending $20,000 for a $40,000 conservation grant. So we get a nice plaque and we get to tell the board we've got a grant. And you look in the back row, my employees are rolling their eyes, but it did have some benefit.
Well, with that note, no, I think to Amy's point though, the data is key. We've studied a lot of data on our project just for our water right, the needs, the hydrology is key, hydrographs. I think as you move along, the costing data is going to be important, and as you move further along in the design and the actual infrastructure development, I mean, if you're actually running that piece, you're gonna have to really understand, if you want infrastructure money there. So I think that just really advancing the project and really understanding that is going to be key information and data that can be put into, not just for grants or asking for outside funding, but I mean, just for us ourselves to understand the cost keeps going up because this or that, or how can we trim costs here and there to make it more efficient? So that's a key piece for me, is just the costing.
We've talked about several different types of storage, and we think whether it's small projects that benefit a relatively small number of people. You can also have very large projects that benefit a large geographic area or large municipalities. There's rehabilitation of existing reservoirs. There's starting from scratch to build a new reservoir. What type of water storage will be the easiest to do in the future? And how optimistic are you about the ability to proceed with the different types of water storage and challenges that we face?
As far as, I'm very optimistic. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing unless I was optimistic and thinking, we're going to move forward. We're utilizing existing storage. I know Currier is actually themselves doing some things to improve their storage. We're building new gravity-fed storage on the Isle Reservoir using an existing ditch company to fill that reservoir. We're using new pumped storage in the Fremont Reservoir. There's on the South Platte, a lot of the low-hanging fruit has already been taken as far as gravity-filled reservoirs. So we do have to do a lot of pump storage. But I did also want to speak to the types of water. We in the South Platte, we talked about we're capturing junior water. This is excess runoff water in the spring in certain years or in flood events that we're able to capture. We're able to, through our project, utilize alternative transfers. So the farmers could lease water into the system to shore up supply. The only water that, as I mentioned, is not on the table is the buy and dry component. So there's, we've talked about reusable return flows that can be put in there, other types of water, but we have drawn the line, and I think rightfully so, taking that off the table. But yeah, any other water, I think, could be off the table that we could store and use.
I too am optimistic. A little history on our reservoir, Root Reservoir. It took 25 years from inception to completion, and it was brought online in 2012 when we started filling it. That's a long time. But what I've seen in my 20 years here is the attitude towards storage has changed. I was always surprised. It seemed like storage was a 4-letter word in Colorado, and I could never figure that out. They brought so much benefit to this state. And, you know, but you see that, I think, with the state supporting storage in their plan, and it's just, now it's not such a negative. So I think that helps, public perception helps, and storage, I think, is certainly going to help us. And, you know, the environmental side of it, you know, once you understand what needs to be done, you can get through those hoops a little better. It's a little easier for us on our Fremont Butte Reservoir or island. We don't have necessarily the pristine trout streams that are out there. But what I try to tell people though is, you know, the environmental mitigation can be overwhelming. But what Parker wants to recast that a little bit, and our environmental mitigation is keeping the farming culture a farming culture. So that takes money and time and effort, and I think that's an effort worth going at. And so when, you know, fortunately no one's asked me to build a trout farm or anything out there, but we're trying to keep the culture out there, I think, is a worthy effort. So I'm optimistic. I think it's getting easier. The federal permits are always tough.
In terms of opportunities, I think we talked a little bit on this panel of the importance of looking at our existing storage opportunities, looking at those rehabilitation potential enlargements, and then I think more and more we're looking at some of the in-system storage that affects some of the different experiences we're going to see in hydrology going forward. It might support some of the diurnal impacts that we see in certain parts of the state. And then in terms of optimism, I'm optimistic that we are learning from each other. We have forums to talk about these projects and identify good partnerships that created win-win opportunities, or projects that are making it through the permitting or have experiences with lining up the funding in a way that's moving the project forward. We do have, you know, potentially once in a lifetime infrastructure money that I think a lot of entities are trying to put our heads together as to how do we work together to capture some of that and move a lot of our projects forward that really needed an influx of that type of money on a larger scale. So I am optimistic just about the opportunities for learning, the opportunities for creativity. Again, from the River District perspective, looking at our funding source, you can see all of the projects that we've funded on a project map on our website. So you can look at, here are some of the projects that we funded that have some of those multi-benefit, multi-purpose components that are becoming more competitive for additional funding.
Let's see, we'll start with the optimism. What keeps me optimistic, I mean, it's the farmer's nature. Next year's going to be better. Might lose a calf now, but next year's going to be okay. You buy hay this year, next year the grass will grow. So definitely optimistic, but the folks on this panel throughout the state and water business really give me a lot of optimism, because we are seeing, dealing with the common threat is bringing us together. It's not, you know, one fear would be that we would factionalize. Instead, it feels like Colorado is really coming together to try to deal with these problems, and storage, to stick to this panel, is going to be key to any of those solutions. As far as timeline and simplicity, I first think of storage, I call it micro storage, but it's really on-farm storage. And that's something that you see happening every year. We see farmers throughout the Arkansas Basin building small storage vessels on their farms just to stabilize the water that they have coming in on their particular farm. It changes the cropping that they can do. So that's important. The next level up is rehabilitating existing storage. I think there are a lot of benefits on having something on the map that's already storage today and just expanding that. It's just viewed differently than if you're doing something completely new. Gravel pit storage, you know, for us, like I said earlier, the South Platte figured this out probably 20 years ago. It takes us about that long to catch up with them. But gravel pit storage, we have all these pits along the Arkansas Basin that really aren't being used for a whole lot once they're mined out. In fact, they become a liability for the pit owner. And so we see them putting liners around those, and you have to, a lot of cases, pump in and pump out of those. But if you do that, you gain something really valuable, and it doesn't seem to be horribly difficult to permit. And then from that level, this is where it starts to get really difficult, and you need a lot more stakeholders. If you start doing a large new storage vessel, particularly anything that's going to be on stream, it's not going to help us in the next 5 years, because I think you're right, it's a 20-year process. And if you do it at that, you should be committed, because that's way faster than I would have necessarily expected you to do it. So I guess, I hope that answers your question. I think there are tiers, and we ought to start with the low-hanging fruit. We ought to support farmers in getting individual storage, micro storage on their farms. They can use equip funds to do that. That's something that pretty much every ditch company and farmer is fairly aware of. So just taking that low-hanging fruit, building up from that, and just keep adding on to that. We get enough storage in the right locations, at least in the Arkansas Basin I'll speak for, you end up with a much more dynamic, flexible system, and one that's much better prepared to deal with the droughts that we know are going to come.
So I wanted to add something Ron said. You know, he talked about how we do storage, and then he also talked about keeping farmers going. Part of the solution. Last summer in 2020, Jim Yon and myself went on a tour with David Nickham from Travel Limited, and Pete Confidence at the time was with Parks and Wildlife. And we went to the North Sterling Reservoir and all the land that was below there to Jim's place, who lives below the North Sterling. Looked at all the wetlands and the habitat that was created, you know, the open space, the farm ground, and you know, that's just one reservoir, existing reservoir. And so we think about, you know, what is it, existing storage and, you know, farm ground, what does that provide to these open spaces and wetlands? And, you know, so we have to think that the new storage, I think, would provide the same type of benefits. But that tour was really the genesis of a special study that the South Platte Basin Roundtable did as part of their, and the Metro Roundtable as part of their basin implementation plan that will be going forward here. We actually looked at the benefits of irrigated agriculture to habitat and open space and different species in the lower river. And, you know, some of that's from just direct flow irrigation, but a lot of that is created by storage projects. And so it's always been my thought of, you know, doing storage, we need to tell our story of, you know, here's what existing storage does and here's what new storage can do. And I agree. I think that, you know, the message is coming across more and more. You know, it's not this four-letter word. It can provide all these benefits, not just for the people who are directly using it, but the indirect benefits that come from storage.
Well, thank you. This time we're going to give you a chance, the audience, to be involved in the discussion. I have one question while you're thinking about questions you want to ask. One that's coming in is what do you think of underground storage? Is it feasible? I want to address that.
So what we refer to it as ASR, underground aquifer storage and recovery, and it's catching on in the metro area. And but Parker doesn't participate. We support it. We think it's a good idea. It's interesting technology. You can stick treated water into the aquifer and it forms this bubble. And then they pull out that water and they can tell when they get back to native water through the chemistry analysis of it. And so it's a great idea. We have a 75,000 acre reservoir, and one of the downsides to ASR is you have to put more holes in the ground to get the water out quicker. So you can put it in, but you can't get it out any faster than the wells. Where a reservoir is kind of nice, you just go turn a valve and it opens up and you get more water. So it's a good way to protect water. It's very popular. You're treating water to stick it in the ground to pull it back out to treat again, so there's a little higher cost, but it's certainly catching on, and we've got a lot more people doing it in the Front Range.
I can add to, I do think underground storage is good. There are pros and cons. We did in the South Platte storage study, we looked at how much water could be collected in the basin and stored, and we looked at all the different types of storage, and underground was one of those. As Ron mentioned, when we talk about these flash events in the South Platte, you would almost need to do it conjunctively with above ground storage and below ground, because of the time, you're not going to be able to put a large amount of water underground in a short enough time. So you would need to store it and then, bleed it into the ground over time, and recover that. So yeah, there's a lot of different options. We also do, it's not storage, but we do augmentation or recharge in the South Platte Basin, where it's the water's transient, it's moving back, and we use that as a supply, using the underground to augment, and we can take advantage of that as well.
I should mention, Centennial Water has been doing this, I think, for 20 years, and they've got a great program. And we highly encourage them, since they're upgrading of us. So we let them put the water in, and we don't pull it.
Any of you have any questions? Go ahead.
In our basin, we're in the Colorado Basin, and we're not delivering enough water downstream currently. And I for a long time thought about storage as being additional storage as being a really important part of our overall plan. But I'm just curious about how we balance the issue of compact compliance or downstream delivery with this idea that we actually have the capacity to put more water in storage. And I know none of y'all, well, I guess you're West Slope, but what is how do you merge those two considerations?
No, I think it's a great question, and compact compliance is at the forefront of our minds, especially as we're seeing the deteriorating conditions in the Colorado River Basin. And I think you have to think about them in tandem. We have certain storage within the Colorado River Storage and Protection Act that exists to provide some buffer for compact compliance. I think we look at our storage for the different purposes that they provide. And it's really looking at how do we provide the water that we're entitled to within our state for our water users, and also maintain our position and provide that compact compliance that we're required under the 1922 Colorado River Compact.
Another question on do farmers that build micro storage file for a water storage right, or do they follow the 72-hour storage limitation?
I think that was strict, since I said micro storage. They use the 72-hour rule. So again, can't speak for other basins. A lot of the ditches in the Arkansas Basin run on rotation. And so what we've heard from farmers is when it's a very wet time of year during runoff, they may go 2 days on, 5 days off, 2 days on, 5 days off. As it gets drier and drier, though, it may go 2 days on, 14 days off, 2 days on, 21 days off. And so what they'll typically do, and we see this a lot with center pivots, is put in a pond, store the water for 72 hours. It just extends that period of time and shrinks that period of time that you're not having water. I think we've seen one instance where the farmer said 72 hours isn't enough. And so they did go ahead and get a new storage water right to be allowed to do that. But that, as everybody knows, gets complicated once you're in water quality.
Anyone else have a question?
I have one, Joe, I have a question for you. So when the Northern Colorado farmers talk about pipelines going from the Colorado to Denver, it's about a split group saying we don't want dry and dry water going down those pipes. But the other side of the table, some of these farmers say, hey, look, you're eliminating my ability to sell my water right to another buyer. And I know we had a complex conversation last night about eliminating competition. And how do you feel about that?
Yeah, that question has come up early and often. And we feel like we've tackled that question by being upfront and transparent. We're not taking anybody's right away to sell their water. And And there could be a parallel, a new project that gets built that allows that in there. But, you know, I could see if we built this project and didn't let people know up front, and then 20 years down the road, then we said, no, we're not gonna allow buying, right? But we're up front saying that, so I don't think we're impacting anybody's property right to sell by putting those restrictions on up front. We're being transparent up front. So I think that's really how we've addressed that issue.
And it sounds like you guys had an awesome panel on anti-speculation. I'm sorry I missed it. I think about the, Joe, what you just said speaks to me, right? You do not want to take away anybody's personal property right. And I have had, as we talked to folks, farmers about our water sharing program, I had one in particular that got really angry and he said, but I'm old, I want to retire, I don't care about your blankety blank water sharing program. Why don't you just come buy my farm? But what I would say is, as a city, we have a right to say, but we don't want to do it the old way. We don't want to have another Carlyle County example. And so that's our right to say, we're going to do this in collaborative ways. And yes, I know that may frustrate a few people, but by and large, I think you get a lot more support that way. And what we see is, I think you see another generation come up in farming that is really excited. And so instead, I would much rather have them go deal with the person that's ready to retire and sell their farm rather than have us necessarily pick that up. Because once that happens, once that water is permanently transferred, you guys know it never comes back again. So if you want to do that, more power to you. But we just, Colorado Springs probably isn't going to be the buyer of that because it's not something we're interested in doing.
How do we best mitigate or address the issue of evaporation and storage?
You don't, that's science. No, there's a bunch of crazy ideas. There's these balls that you put out there, they're tennis balls, but then it kills birds and you can't fish on the water. High mountain storage tends to be much better. So running a system in a way, and we do run our system this way. In the winter time, we store up water on the eastern plains. We move it up to higher storage in the summer, and the evap is just significantly less. The deeper your storage, the less evap you're going to have per acre foot overall. And we have a lot of reservoirs that are just wide and very flat. There's a lot of evap there. But it kind of is a necessary evil that is going to happen when you store water. You're going to lose some of it to evap.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things we thought about is, yeah, you lose water to evaporation, but in what we're looking at, we're losing water. You know, that runoff water that leaves the state, we wouldn't be able to, you know, if we don't build this project, we wouldn't be capturing it and putting it to beneficial use. So it would be, you know, it's a much larger loss than the evap, and I agree with deeper storage.